This classroom is home to Hanadi and her family after a school became a displacement center for those fleeing the fighting between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. She says it's been a place of refuge, but the presence of a blackboard is a constant reminder to her children that they're missing out on school for a second year.
Raya wants to go to school, but with the war and closure of schools, there is no school. We've been displaced and we don't have the means to enrol her and her siblings to schools. Even before the conflict, our circumstances were tough, but she was determined to go to school. Now she doesn't know what to do.
The school is one of hundreds around the country that are sheltering some of Sudan's 9 million internally displaced people. Magbula and her family are also here. She says, despite some schools functioning normally in Omdurman, none of her 4 school-aged children has access to education.
The kids were good at school. They performed well, but we were displaced when the RSF came to our neighborhood, and now they don't have access to school. Some schools have opened, but we can't enroll them because we have no money, and that depresses the children to see people that age going to school when they can't.
The conflict, now in its 19th month, has displaced more than 5 million children, according to aid organizations. Before the conflict, there were 7 million out-of-school children in Sudan, according to the UN's Children Agency. That number has now risen significantly, with more than 14 million children cut off from basic education as a result of the fighting and displacement. But not all children stay at home or displacement camps, waiting for the opportunity to return to their studies. A worsening economy has driven some children to try to earn money to help their displaced families. Ramadan Bakhid is one of those children. The 14-year-old was in 6th grade before the war changed the course of his life.
I started working since the start of the war. I do that to help my family because of the economic situation. We used to live in Western Ombada, and the RSF forced us from our homes. We now live in displacement camps, and the money I earn helps my family with the expenses.
Sudan's government says thousands of children have turned to street jobs to support their families, though it lacks exact figures. And while in states under army control, schools are functioning normally, for the millions worst affected by the fighting, the priority is to earn enough money to survive. The education of their children must wait until the conflict ends, whenever that will be. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera, Omdurman.
We can now speak to Sheldon Yett, who's a UNICEF representative for Sudan. He's joining us live from Port Sudan. Thank you for your time, sir. So as we saw in Hiba's report, education is hugely impacted. What does this disruption in education mean for children and their long-term future?
Well, thank you, Doreen. It means that millions of children will not have the future they deserve, will not have their rights to education. It will also mean that this country will be kept behind and will be subject to risks of further unrest, further displacement. Education, of course, provides an opportunity for children to learn the basic arithmetic, the basic literary skills, but it also provides a protective environment. These children, as you saw so eloquently in your report, are deprived of that environment, and that's going to cause issues for many years to come. We've got to solve this now.
What would you say is the most devastating impact of the war on children in Sudan?
Well, there's so many. This is a conflict. This is a war that's affecting every element of children's lives, their ability to get health care, their ability to get nutrition, their ability to go to school, their ability to live and thrive in a protective environment. The lack of education has an impact on all of these issues. You know, often we see as education as a secondary need, but it's really a primary need. If we're going to ensure that we can meet children's rights, if we're going to ensure that children are not on the street, that children are actually getting the protection they deserve, their rights they deserve, are getting the health care, the water and sanitation, the hygiene they deserve, we need to make sure that they're in school.
I mean, the needs just sound immense, and we know that more than 5 million children in Sudan have had to flee their homes in search of safety. How is UNICEF responding to these immense needs of children?
You're absolutely right, and I've been with UNICEF for almost 30 years, and war zones across the world. And I've never seen anything like what we're seeing in Sudan. We're working to ensure that children are able to go to school, if not in their classroom, then in alternative schools. We're making sure that they have basic health care, that they have access to water and sanitation, that they have the nutritional support they require. But again, it's essential that we do this with a holistic package. Yes, there's famine here. Yes, there's outbreaks of cholera, but we need to address all these needs together.
I mean, on the outbreaks of cholera, to what extent does the children living in these overcrowded camps, as well as settlements with little to no access to adequate shelter, to what extent does that put them at greater risk of malnutrition, as well as these deadly disease outbreaks that you just mentioned?
You said it well. It puts them at far greater risk. You know, I've met many children here who've been forced to flee multiple times, and they've been forced to flee and to live with others in displaced camps and with other very generous hosts and communities around Sudan. But all of these communities are at much greater risk given the overcrowding. That's why it's so essential that we get children home, that we have an end to the war, that we have schools up and functioning all around this country.
And a final thought from you on the international community, because Sudan today is unfortunately not on the top of the international agenda with so many crises going on around the world. How are you convincing donors as UNICEF that Sudan needs to remain a priority?
You're quite right. It is not on the front pages of the newspapers, and I'm very pleased that Jazeera is talking about it today. But if we don't address this crisis now, this massive crisis, it's going to get even larger. It's going to continue to ripple for year after year to neighboring countries. It's not going to go away, and we're going to have a much larger problem on our hands. We need to invest in children today, and we need to invest in children now.
Okay, Sheldon Yett, UNICEF Representative for Sudan. Thank you for joining us from Port Sudan.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.